The rope cuts deep into his wrists as Marcus Thompson hangs upside down from the abandoned warehouse beam. Blood trickling down his arms.
Keep moving! Don't stop!
Three armed
Yes,
men
sir!
circle below
Push
him
through,
like
almost
vultures,
there!
their
Copy
faces
that!
masked but their intentions crystal clear. They've made one critical mistake, though. They think the unconscious man they've captured and bound is just another wealthy businessman they can ransom for millions. They have no idea they've just kidnapped a retired Navy SEAL. What happens next will become the stuff of legend in military circles, a story whispered in training camps and barracks around the world. Because when you corner a predator, when you push a warrior past his breaking point, when you threaten everything he holds dear, you don't get surrender. You get a masterclass in survival, strategy, and the kind of lethal precision that only comes from years of training in the world's most elite fighting force. This is the true story of 72 hours that changed everything. A story of betrayal, survival, and the moment three criminals realized they hadn't captured prey, they had awakened a hunter. Marcus Thompson adjusted his rearview mirror for the third time in 10 minutes, watching the black sedan that had been following him since he left his downtown office. After 12 years as a Navy SEAL and another 8 running his private security consulting firm, he trusted his instincts completely. Someone was tracking his movements, and they were being sloppy about it. The autumn rain pelted his windshield as he navigated through the evening traffic of Seattle's business district. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Sarah. Dinner at 7. Emma has soccer practice stories to share. A smile crossed his weathered face. His 8-year-old daughter never failed to brighten his day with her animated recounting of her adventures on the field. But the smile faded as the sedan made the same right turn he did, maintaining the same distance it had kept for the past 20 minutes. Marcus had been hired by wealthy clients before who attracted unwanted attention, but this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. His mind flashed back to the meeting he'd just left at Morrison Industries, where CEO Robert Morrison had hired him to investigate threats against his family. Morrison's teenage son had been receiving disturbing messages, and his wife had noticed cars parked outside their gated community. What had seemed like a straightforward security assessment was starting to feel like something much more complex. Marcus pulled into a gas station pretending to check his fuel gauge while observing the sedan through his peripheral vision. It parked across the street, engine running. Through the tinted windows, he could make out the silhouettes of at least 2 people inside. His training kicked in automatically. Assess threats, identify escape routes, prepare for engagement. He filled his tank slowly, using the time to study his surroundings. The gas station sat at a busy intersection with multiple exit points. Security cameras covered most angles, though he noticed 2 blind spots near the rear of the building. The attendant inside was a young kid, probably college age, completely oblivious to the tension building outside. As Marcus replaced the gas cap, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Morrison's number. "Thompson here. Marcus, thank God you answered." Morrison's voice was strained, almost panicked. "Something's happened. My son Jamie didn't come home from school. His phone goes straight to voicemail, and his friends say they haven't seen him since lunch." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "Have you called the police?" "They're involved now, but they're treating it like a typical runaway situation. You and I both know it's not. Those threats we discussed, they were real. Someone has my boy." Through his windshield, Marcus watched the sedan's passenger door open. A man in a dark jacket stepped out, talking on a phone while keeping his eyes fixed on Marcus's location. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. "Robert, listen carefully," Marcus said, his voice dropping to the calm, controlled tone he'd used in countless combat situations. "I think I'm being followed right now. This isn't random. Whoever took Jamie might be making a move on me too." "What?" "Marcus, get out of there. Come to the house. I've got security." "No, that's exactly what they'd expect. I need you to stay put and let the police handle Jamie's situation for now. Don't do anything that might escalate things." Marcus ended the call and immediately dialed his wife. The phone rang twice before Sarah's familiar voice answered. "Hey, honey, you're cutting it close for dinner. Sarah, I need you to listen very carefully and don't ask questions right now. Take Emma and go to your sister's house in Tacoma. Pack a bag for a few days and leave within the next 10 minutes. The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats before Sarah responded, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Marcus, what's happening?" "I don't know yet, but I need to know you and Emma are safe while I figure it out." Can you do that for me? Of course. Should I call? No police yet. I'll call you in 2 hours. If you don't hear from me by then, call Detective Rodriguez at Seattle PD and tell him everything. He knows me. Marcus hung up and took a deep breath, centering himself the way he'd been trained to do before high-risk operations. The man from the sedan was now walking casually toward the convenience store, but his path would take him close to Marcus's truck. In the reflection of his side mirror, Marcus could see a second figure moving around the back of the gas station. They were positioning themselves for a coordinated approach. Marcus had 2 options: try to outrun them and potentially lead danger back to his family, or confront the situation head-on. His SEAL training had taught him that running from a problem rarely solved it. It usually just delayed the inevitable while giving the enemy time to prepare. He made his choice. Walking into the convenience store, Marcus nodded to the young attendant and grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerated section. The man from the sedan entered 30 seconds later, pretending to browse the snack aisle while keeping Marcus in his peripheral vision. "Evening," Marcus said casually to the man as he passed. The stranger grunted a response but didn't make eye contact. Amateur mistake. A professional would have engaged in normal conversation to avoid suspicion. At the counter, Marcus paid for his water and asked the attendant about the restroom location. As the kid pointed toward the back of the store, Marcus caught sight of the second man through the window. He was now positioned near Marcus's truck, partially concealed behind a delivery van. The setup was becoming clear. They planned to take him in the parking lot, probably as he returned to his vehicle. The question was whether they wanted him alive or dead. Marcus thanked the attendant and walked toward the restroom, but instead of entering, he slipped out the store's rear exit. The rain had intensified, providing natural cover as he moved along the back of the building. Years of covert operations had taught him how to move silently, even on wet pavement. He circled around to approach his truck from an unexpected angle, using parked cars as cover. The second man was crouched beside a van about 20 feet from Marcus's vehicle, speaking quietly into a radio. Marcus could just make out the words, "Target acquired," and "Move on my signal," the confirmation he needed. This was definitely a coordinated kidnapping attempt. Marcus had faced worse odds in Afghanistan and Iraq, but those had been battlefields where the rules were clear. This was his hometown, where innocent civilians could get caught in the crossfire. He needed to end this quickly and quietly. Moving like a ghost, Marcus approached the crouched figure from behind. In one fluid motion, he wrapped his arm around the man's throat in a sleeper hold while simultaneously grabbing the radio with his other hand. The man struggled for perhaps 10 seconds before going limp. Marcus quickly searched the unconscious man, finding a pistol, zip ties, and a syringe filled with what he assumed was a sedative. Professional kidnapping tools. He pocketed the weapon and zip-tied the man's hands behind his back before dragging him behind the van where he wouldn't be easily discovered. The radio crackled. "Base to Team 2, what's your status?" Marcus keyed the microphone and whispered in a gruff voice, hoping to buy time. "In position. Give me 2 more minutes." "Copy that. Team 1 is ready to move." Marcus needed to reach his truck before they realized something was wrong, but the first man was probably still in the store, watching the front entrance. He had perhaps 60 seconds before the unconscious man's absence would be noticed. Staying low, Marcus sprinted to his truck and dove into the driver's seat. The engine turned over immediately, and he reversed out of the parking space just as the store's front door chimed. In his rearview mirror, he saw the first man step outside, phone pressed to his ear. Marcus floored the accelerator, but instead of heading home or toward a police station, he turned toward the industrial district. If these people wanted him, he'd lead them away from populated areas where they could cause collateral damage. And if they were connected to Jamie Morrison's kidnapping, he needed to draw them out to learn more. The sedan roared to life and gave chase, joined now by a second vehicle that had been waiting in a nearby parking lot. Marcus smiled grimly as he navigated through traffic. They thought they were hunting him, but the roles were about to reverse. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We have the boy. Warehouse District, Pier 47. Come alone or he dies. 1 hour." The trap was set and Marcus was driving straight into it. But that was exactly where he wanted to be. 20 minutes later, Marcus parked his truck 6 blocks away from Pier 47 and continued on foot through the maze of abandoned warehouses that dotted Seattle's old industrial waterfront. The rain had turned into a steady drizzle, muffling sound and reducing visibility, conditions that favored a trained operator over panicked criminals. He moved systematically through the area, using skills honed in the urban warfare environments of Fallujah and Mosul. Every shadow was checked, every sightline evaluated, every potential ambush point catalogued. These kidnappers might have the element of surprise and superior numbers, but Marcus had something they couldn't match: decades of training in the world's most hostile environments. Warehouse 47 stood at the end of a deteriorating pier, its windows boarded up and walls covered in graffiti. A single light glowed from a window on the second floor. As Marcus approached, he could see two vehicles parked behind the building, the sedan that had followed him, plus a black van with tinted windows. He spent 20 minutes circling the building, identifying 3 possible entry points and at least 2 guards posted outside. Through a crack in one of the boarded windows, he glimpsed several figures moving inside, including what appeared to be someone tied to a chair. Jamie Morrison, if Marcus's instincts were correct. The smart move would be to call for backup, to let the police handle the hostage situation. But the kidnappers had been specific: come alone, or the boy dies. And Marcus had learned in his years of combat that sometimes the direct approach was the only approach that worked. He checked his borrowed pistol, fully loaded with 1 round chambered. Not much firepower for what he was about to attempt, but he'd accomplished more with less in the deserts of the Middle East. Marcus Thompson had spent his adult life running toward danger, while others ran away from it. Tonight would be no different. But as he prepared to breach the warehouse, he had no idea that this wasn't just a kidnapping for ransom. The people inside weren't common criminals looking for a quick payday. They were part of something much larger, much more dangerous, and they had been planning this operation for months. Marcus wasn't walking into a simple rescue mission. He was walking into the most deadly trap of his life. The warehouse's side entrance was secured with a chain and padlock, but the metal doorframe had rotted enough that Marcus could pry it open with minimal noise. He slipped inside, immediately crouching low and letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior. The smell hit him first: motor oil, rust, and something else. Something organic and unpleasant that made his stomach tighten. Voices echoed from the upper level. At least 3 distinct speakers engaged in heated conversation. Marcus couldn't make out the words yet, but the tone suggested disagreement, possibly about him or their timeline. He moved carefully between stacks of abandoned equipment and shipping containers, working his way toward a staircase he'd spotted during his external reconnaissance. The building's layout was typical of the old waterfront warehouses: 2 floors with the upper level serving as office space and storage. Multiple escape routes existed, including loading dock doors that opened directly onto the pier. If things went wrong, he could potentially extract both himself and Jamie through the water route, though the Puget Sound's temperature in October would present its own challenges. As Marcus reached the base of the staircase, one voice from above became clear enough to understand. A man with what sounded like an Eastern European accent was speaking. The SEAL should have been here by now. Perhaps our intelligence was wrong about his psychology. Perhaps he values his own life more than the boy's. A second voice, distinctly American and rougher, responded. Thompson's coming. I've studied his service record. Guy never left anyone behind in 12 years of operations. He's not starting now. Then where is he, Victor? We've been waiting 40 minutes. Marcus smiled coldly. They knew his name, his background, his psychological profile. This wasn't a random kidnapping. He was the primary target, and Jamie Morrison was just leverage. The question was why someone wanted him badly enough to orchestrate such an elaborate trap. He climbed the stairs slowly, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. The old wood creaked despite his caution, but the sound was masked by the rain drumming against the warehouse's metal roof. At the top, a narrow hallway stretched toward the lighted room where the voices originated. Through a partially open door, Marcus could see into the main office space. Jamie Morrison sat bound to a metal chair in the center of the room, duct tape across his mouth, but his eyes alert and tracking movement around him. The boy was scared, but trying to stay calm. Good survival instincts for a 16-year-old. 3 men occupied the room. The one called Victor was tall and lean, dressed in expensive casual clothes that seemed out of place in the decrepit warehouse. He carried himself with military bearing, possibly former Special Forces himself. The American who had spoken earlier was shorter but powerfully built, with the kind of scarred hands that suggested a background in violent work. The third man stood by the window, younger than the others, and clearly nervous. Marcus evaluated the tactical situation. 3 armed opponents in a confined space with a hostage complicating any direct assault. The room had 2 entrances, the door he was observing through, and another that likely led to a second staircase he hadn't identified during his reconnaissance. Windows provided natural light, but were too high for easy escape. "Call him again," Victor ordered the nervous young man. "Tell him we're growing impatient." The young man dialed a number and held the phone to his ear. Seconds later, Marcus felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He let it go to voicemail. "Still not answering," the caller reported. Victor cursed in what Marcus assumed was Russian or Ukrainian. 10 more minutes, then we proceed to phase 2. "What about the boy?" the American asked. "The boy becomes a message. Thompson will cooperate once he understands we're serious. Phase 2. A message." Marcus's blood ran cold as the implications became clear. These weren't kidnappers planning to negotiate for Jamie's release. They intended to hurt or kill the teenager to force Marcus's compliance with some larger plan. The direct assault option was looking more attractive by the minute, but Marcus forced himself to gather more intelligence first. He needed to understand what they ultimately wanted from him before making his move. Using his phone's camera, he began recording the conversation while remaining concealed in the hallway. Whatever this was about, he wanted evidence of their intentions. "Remind me again why we couldn't simply eliminate Thompson at his office," the American was saying. "Would have been cleaner than this circus." Victor turned from the window, his expression cold and professional. "Because we need him alive and cooperative for the next 48 hours. The contracts he signed with Morrison Industries include security protocols for their overseas operations, specifically their facilities in eastern Ukraine." Marcus felt puzzle pieces clicking into place. Morrison Industries had extensive international operations, including several manufacturing plants in regions that had become geopolitically sensitive over the past few years. His security consulting work had included recommendations for protecting those facilities and their personnel. "The access codes change every 72 hours, Victor continued. "Thompson implemented the system personally 6 months ago. Without his cooperation, we cannot proceed with the operation." "And if he refuses?" the young man asked. Victor gestured toward Jamie. "Then Mr. Thompson learns that his moral code has consequences. We take the boy apart piece by piece until he reconsiders his position." The casual brutality in Victor's voice made Marcus's decision for him. He'd heard enough. These weren't just kidnappers or even typical criminals. They were foreign operatives planning something that involved Morrison Industries' Ukrainian facilities. And they were willing to torture a teenager to force his cooperation. Marcus retreated down the hallway, moving quickly but silently. He needed to change the tactical dynamic before they grew suspicious of his absence, and decided to hurt Jamie as motivation for his arrival. Back on the ground floor, Marcus explored the warehouse's layout more thoroughly, looking for advantages he could exploit. In a corner storage room, he found exactly what he needed: electrical junction box that controlled the building's limited lighting system. One quick adjustment would plunge the upper floor into darkness, giving him the cover he needed for a rapid assault. But first, he needed to create a distraction that would draw at least one of the kidnappers away from Jamie. Marcus found a broken piece of rebar and used it to pry open one of the loading dock doors. The metal screamed in protest, echoing through the warehouse like a banshee's wail. Immediately, he heard shouting from upstairs and the sound of feet running across the floor. "Check that out," Victor's voice commanded. "Could be Thompson trying to breach from another direction." "Perfect." Marcus positioned himself behind a shipping container with a clear view of both staircases, then cut the power to the upper floor. Darkness fell like a curtain, followed by more shouting and the bright beams of flashlights cutting through the gloom above. Heavy footsteps thundered down the main staircase. The American, based on his build and gait. The man moved cautiously, pistol drawn and flashlight sweeping back and forth as he approached the open loading dock. Marcus let him pass, then emerged from cover like a nightmare made real. One hand clamped over the man's mouth, while the other applied pressure to a nerve cluster in his neck. The American dropped unconscious without firing a shot, his flashlight clattering across the concrete floor. 1 down, 2 to go. Marcus appropriated the man's weapon. a .45 caliber pistol with an extended magazine, and his flashlight. Now he had better firepower for what came next. "Danny, report." Victor's voice called down from the darkness above. Marcus waited, letting tension build. In his experience, criminals under stress made predictable mistakes. They would send the second man to investigate Danny's silence, leaving Victor alone with Jamie. That would give Marcus the opening he needed. Sure enough, footsteps began descending the second staircase. The nervous young man appeared in the beam of his flashlight, moving much less confidently than Danny had. This one was scared, probably recruited for his technical skills rather than combat ability. Marcus let him reach the bottom of the stairs before moving. He stepped into view with both pistols raised, one trained on the young man and the other aimed toward the upper level. "Drop your weapon and get on your knees," Marcus commanded in the tone he'd used to control prisoners in Iraq. The young man's gun clattered to the floor immediately, and he collapsed rather than knelt, hands raised and trembling. "Please don't kill me," he whispered. "This wasn't my idea. I just needed the money." "What's your name?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice low. Alex Petrov. "I'm just a computer programmer. Victor hired me to hack some security systems." "The Morrison Industries systems?" Alex nodded frantically. "Ukrainian facilities, production schedules, employee databases, security protocols." Victor said it was corporate espionage, nothing violent. Marcus studied the terrified young man. He was telling the truth, probably brought in as technical support without understanding the full scope of the operation. That made him potentially useful. "Alex, I'm going to give you one chance to make this right," Marcus said. "You're going to help me get that boy out of here safely. Can you do that?" Yes, anything. I didn't know they were going to hurt anyone." From upstairs, Victor's voice boomed through the darkness. "Thompson, I know you're down there. You have 30 seconds to show yourself, or the boy loses a finger." Marcus's jaw tightened. Time for negotiation had expired. "Alex, stay here and don't move," he ordered. "If Victor comes down those stairs, you scream as loud as you can. Understood?" The young man nodded, still trembling. Marcus began climbing the main staircase, both pistols ready. He'd conducted dozens of hostage rescues during his SEAL career, but never with such personal stakes involved. Jamie Morrison wasn't just a mission objective. He was a scared kid who'd been dragged into something far beyond his understanding. At the top of the stairs, Marcus could see the faint glow of a flashlight from the office where Victor held Jamie. The man was speaking, probably trying to use the boy's fear as psychological warfare against Marcus. "Your friend Thompson is here, Jamie, but he's being selfish. He could end your suffering by simply cooperating with us, but instead he chooses to play soldier. What kind of man values computer passwords more than a child's life?" Marcus reached the doorway and assessed the situation through the crack. Victor had positioned himself behind Jamie's chair, using the teenager as a human shield while holding a combat knife to the boy's throat. Professional positioning that showed military training. "I know you're there, Thompson," Victor called out. Your breathing changed the acoustics in the hallway. "Come in slowly, weapons on the floor, or I open the boy's carotid artery." Marcus had been in similar standoffs before. The key was controlling the engagement's tempo and geography while exploiting the hostage-taker's psychological weaknesses. Victor was clearly military trained, but he was also operating under pressure in a foreign country with a mission that had already gone sideways. "I'm coming in," Marcus announced. "But first, I want to know what you really want. This isn't about ransom money. Smart man, step into the light where I can see you." Marcus moved into the doorway, hands visible but still gripping his weapons. In the flashlight's glow, he could see Jamie's eyes wide with terror but still alert. The boy was looking for any opportunity to help, which could be either useful or dangerous depending on the timing. "You're right about the money," Victor said, his accent thick with stress. "We need access to the Morrison Industries facilities in Kharkiv and Dnipro. Specifically, we need their production schedules for the next 6 months. "Industrial espionage," Marcus observed. "Someone's paying you to steal manufacturing data. Someone is paying us to ensure that certain contracts are not fulfilled on schedule. The Ukrainian government has agreements with Morrison Industries for equipment that would complicate our employer's plans in the region. The picture was becoming clearer. Victor and his team were working for someone who wanted to disrupt Ukrainian military or infrastructure contracts by sabotaging Morrison's production schedules. The teenager tied to the chair was collateral damage in a much larger geopolitical game. And you need me because Morrison's security systems require biometric authentication for remote access, Marcus continued. Very good. Your fingerprints and retinal scans are the only way to access the system from outside the corporate network. We tried other methods, but your security protocols are quite thorough. Marcus smiled grimly. I designed them to be. Indeed. So here is our arrangement. You will provide us with the access we need, and in return, young Jamie returns home safely. Refuse, and his death will be on your conscience. There's a third option, Marcus said calmly. Victor's grip tightened on the knife. Which is? You made a critical error in your planning, Victor. You assumed I'd be as predictable as your psychological profile suggested. You expected me to walk in here alone, surrender my weapons, and cooperate to save the boy. That is exactly what you are doing. Marcus's smile widened. No. What I'm doing is keeping you talking while Alex downstairs calls the FBI to report a terrorist plot involving foreign operatives and American corporate infrastructure. It was a bluff. Alex was too terrified to take any initiative, but Victor's reaction confirmed Marcus's read of the man's psychology. Military-trained but working outside his comfort zone, under pressure to succeed with a mission that was unraveling rapidly. Victor's flashlight beam wavered slightly as he processed this information. You're lying. Alex Petrov, computer programmer from Kiev, recruited 6 weeks ago to hack corporate databases, currently cooperating with federal authorities in exchange for witness protection. Would you like me to continue? The knife at Jamie's throat trembled as Victor's composure cracked. In that moment of uncertainty, Marcus saw his opportunity. But before he could move, the lights suddenly blazed back to life, flooding the room with harsh fluorescent illumination. Someone had restored power to the building, which meant either the authorities had arrived or Victor had additional backup that Marcus hadn't accounted for. The answer came in the form of footsteps on the stairs and a new voice calling up from below. Victor, we have a problem. The entire area is surrounded by FBI and local police. Someone called in our location. Marcus's bluff had become reality, but not through his own actions. Someone else had been watching the warehouse, someone with the resources and motivation to bring federal law enforcement into the situation. Victor's face contorted with rage as he realized his operation had been compromised from multiple directions. You arrogant American fool. Do you think this ends here? Do you think we are the only ones interested in stopping Morrison's contracts? The knife pressed deeper against Jamie's throat, drawing a thin line of blood. The boy whimpered through his gag, eyes locked on Marcus in desperate hope. Time slowed to the microsecond intervals that Marcus remembered from combat. Every detail sharpened to crystal clarity. Victor's white knuckles on the knife handle, Jamie's pulse visible in his neck just inches from the blade. The sound of multiple vehicles arriving outside. The smell of fear and desperation filling the stale air. Marcus had perhaps 2 seconds to act before Victor either killed Jamie in frustration or tried to use him as a bargaining chip with law enforcement. Neither option was acceptable. The throw had to be perfect, close enough to neutralize Victor instantly, accurate enough to avoid hitting Jamie, fast enough to prevent a reflexive slashing motion that would prove fatal for the teenager. Marcus Thompson had made impossible shots in Afghanistan, had performed life-or-death calculations in the heat of battle, had saved lives when seconds mattered more than breathing, but he'd never faced stakes quite like these. Marcus's combat knife left his hand in a fluid motion that seemed to defy physics. The blade spun twice in the space between him and Victor, covering the 8-foot distance in less than half a second. It struck Victor in the hollow of his throat with surgical precision, severing the carotid artery and windpipe simultaneously. Victor's eyes widened in shock as his knife hand spasmed and fell away from Jamie's neck. He collapsed backward, his weapon clattering harmlessly across the floor as blood pooled beneath him. The entire sequence had taken 1.3 seconds. Marcus was already moving before Victor hit the ground, diving toward Jamie's chair and cutting the zip ties that bound the teenager's hands and feet. "You're okay," he said firmly, pulling the duct tape from Jamie's mouth. "You're safe now. We're getting out of here." Jamie gasped and tried to speak, but only managed a strangled whisper. "My neck." Marcus examined the shallow cut Victor's knife had made. It was bleeding, but not deep enough to have damaged any critical vessels. "You'll need stitches, but you're going to be fine. Can you walk?" Jamie nodded shakily, allowing Marcus to help him stand. Through the office windows, red and blue lights strobed across the warehouse walls as law enforcement vehicles surrounded the building. A helicopter circled overhead, its spotlight cutting through the rain and darkness. "FBI! Everyone on the ground, now!" The command echoed through the warehouse from multiple directions as tactical teams breached the building. Marcus quickly raised his hands, pulling Jamie close to his side. "We're victims!" Marcus shouted back. "Hostage and rescuer. Coming down the stairs now. Hands where we can see them. Move slowly." Marcus guided Jamie toward the staircase, both of them moving deliberately with their hands visible. As they descended, Marcus could see black-clad agents securing the ground floor. Alex Petrov was already handcuffed and sitting against a wall, looking relieved to be in federal custody rather than facing Victor's potential wrath for the operation's failure. At the bottom of the stairs, Marcus and Jamie were immediately separated as agents verified their identities and assessed their medical conditions. EMT teams arrived within minutes, treating Jamie's neck wound and checking both of them for signs of serious injury or trauma. Agent Sarah Chen, a compact Asian woman with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to taking charge, approached Marcus as medics finished their evaluation. "Mr. Thompson, Agent Chen, FBI. We need to debrief you on what happened here tonight." "Gladly," Marcus replied. "But first, I need to know how you found us." "I didn't call for backup." Chen exchanged a glance with her partner, a tall African-American man who introduced himself as Agent Williams. "We've been tracking Viktor Kozlov and his associates for 6 weeks. This warehouse was under surveillance as part of a larger investigation into foreign attempts to compromise American corporate infrastructure." "So you knew about the kidnapping plan?" "We knew they were planning something involving Morrison Industries, but we didn't anticipate they'd target Morrison's family or involve you directly. Our intelligence suggested they were focused on cyber infiltration." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October rain still falling outside. "You're telling me you watched them grab a 16-year-old boy and didn't intervene?" Agent Williams stepped forward, his expression apologetic but firm. "We lost visual on their team 12 hours ago. When we realized they'd moved to physical kidnapping rather than digital intrusion, we mobilized immediately. You walking into this warehouse triggered our response. How did you know I was here?" Chen pointed to Marcus's phone. "Morrison Industries security chief called us when Robert Morrison reported that both his son and you had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. We've been tracking your phone's GPS signal since then." The pieces were falling into place, but Marcus sensed there were gaps in the story. "What's the larger investigation about?" "Victor mentioned disrupting Ukrainian military contracts. That's classified," Williams said immediately. "I think I've earned the right to know," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the edge of authority he'd used with junior officers who tried to stonewall him. "My security protocols were specifically targeted. A client's son was kidnapped, and I just killed a man to prevent this from escalating. What exactly are we dealing with?" Chen considered for a moment, then seemed to reach a decision. "There's been a coordinated campaign over the past 6 months targeting American companies with defense and infrastructure contracts in Eastern Europe. Corporate espionage, cyber attacks, and now physical operations. The goal appears to be disrupting Western support for Ukrainian reconstruction efforts. Russian intelligence? We believe so, but we haven't been able to prove direct state sponsorship. The operations are too sophisticated for common criminals, but the paper trail leads to private military contractors and organized crime groups." Marcus processed this information while watching Jamie Morrison being loaded into an ambulance for transport to the hospital. The teenager would recover physically, but the psychological impact of this experience would likely stay with him for years. All because his father's company had contracts that someone wanted to sabotage. "There's something else you need to know," Marcus said to the agents. "Victor mentioned this wouldn't end here. He suggested there were others involved in targeting Morrison Industries." Williams and Chen exchanged another look. What exactly did he say? Marcus recounted the conversation as precisely as he could remember. including Victor's references to preventing specific contracts from being fulfilled on schedule and his implication that other teams or operations were involved. This matches intelligence we've received from other incidents, Chen confirmed. Morrison Industries isn't the only company that's been targeted. We're tracking similar operations against at least 6 other firms with significant Eastern European contracts. And you think tonight was just one piece of a larger puzzle? We know it was, Williams said. Which is why we need your continued cooperation. Your security expertise and your direct involvement in tonight's events make you a valuable asset in understanding how these operations work. Marcus shook his head. I'm not interested in becoming a federal informant. I have a family to protect and a business to run. Your family is already at risk, Chen pointed out. Victor's team knew your home address, your wife's workplace, your daughter's school schedule. They'd been watching you for weeks before tonight. Do you really think this ends just because Victor is dead? The implication hit Marcus like a cold slap. Sarah and Emma were still in danger, possibly more so now that he'd disrupted whatever operation Victor had been running. Other teams, other operatives, other people who wanted access to his security protocols and were willing to threaten his family to get it. What are you proposing? He asked. Protective custody for your family while we roll up the rest of Victor's network, Williams explained. In exchange, you help us understand how they plan to exploit your security systems and what other vulnerabilities might exist in similar corporate networks. Marcus considered the offer while ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, carrying Jamie Morrison toward medical care and safety. The boy would survive tonight, but how many other families were at risk from similar operations? How many other teenagers might be targeted because their parents worked for companies with contracts that foreign powers wanted to disrupt? I'll need to talk to my wife, Marcus said finally. Of course. But, Mr. Thompson, you should know that we've already moved your family to a safe location. Agent Rodriguez from Seattle PD coordinated with your wife based on the instructions you gave her earlier. Smart. The FBI had been more thorough than he'd given them credit for. Sarah and Emma were safe. At least for now. How long would this protective custody last? Depends on how quickly we can identify and neutralize the other teams, Chen replied. Could be weeks, could be months. Marcus looked around the warehouse that had nearly become his tomb and Jamie Morrison's grave. Victor Kozlov laid dead upstairs, but his death had solved only the most immediate threat. The larger conspiracy remained intact, and other families remained vulnerable to similar attacks. There's something else, Marcus said. Alex Petrov mentioned that Victor hired him 6 weeks ago to hack Morrison's systems. That suggests this operation was planned well in advance. They weren't reacting to intelligence about my security protocols. They were targeting me specifically from the beginning. Williams nodded grimly. Which means they have detailed intelligence on your background, your methods, your psychology. Someone provided them with very comprehensive information about you personally. The implications were disturbing. Marcus had worked with dozens of clients over the past 8 years, many of whom had detailed knowledge of his capabilities and methods. Someone in his professional network had either been compromised or was actively working with foreign operatives. I want to see the intelligence file they had on me, Marcus said. That might not be, Williams began. Agent Williams, Marcus interrupted. I just prevented an international incident involving the kidnapping and potential murder of an American teenager by foreign operatives. I killed a man tonight to save a boy's life and protect corporate infrastructure that apparently has national security implications. I think I've earned the right to know who's been feeding information about me to the enemy. Chen and Williams exchanged yet another look, and Marcus could see the silent communication passing between them. These were experienced investigators who'd worked together long enough to read each other's thoughts. We'll see what we can do, Chen said finally. But first we need to process this scene and get your formal statement. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of crime scene photography, evidence collection, and detailed interviews. Marcus recounted the evening's events multiple times, each retelling helping investigators understand the sophistication of Victor's operation and the methods his team had used. Alex Petrov, meanwhile, was proving to be a valuable source of intelligence about the technical aspects of the planned infiltration. His laptop contained detailed schematics of Morrison Industries' network architecture, employee databases with personal information about key personnel, and communication logs showing contact with at least 3 other operational teams across the United States. "This is bigger than we thought," Agent Chen confided to Marcus during a brief break in the interviews. Petrov's files suggest coordinated operations in Seattle, Houston, Denver, and Atlanta, all targeting companies with Ukrainian infrastructure contracts. How many people are we talking about? Potentially dozens. This isn't just foreign intelligence gathering. It's economic warfare designed to undermine American foreign policy through corporate sabotage. As dawn broke over Seattle's waterfront, Marcus finally received permission to leave the warehouse. His truck had been impounded as evidence, so Agent Williams offered to drive him to the safe house where Sarah and Emma were waiting. During the drive, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Victor was just the beginning. Others will come. Watch your family carefully." Williams glanced at the phone's screen when Marcus showed him the message. "We need to get that to our tech team for analysis." "It's probably a burner phone with no traceable connection," Marcus observed. "But the message confirms what we suspected. Victor's team wasn't operating in isolation, which means your family stays in protective custody until we can identify all the players in this network." Marcus stared out the window at the familiar streets of his neighborhood as they drove toward the safe house. Everything looked normal. Early commuters heading to work, school buses beginning their routes, coffee shops opening their doors. But beneath that veneer of normalcy, foreign operatives were apparently moving through American cities, targeting corporate executives and security consultants, willing to kidnap teenagers to achieve their objectives. The safe house turned out to be a modest two-story home in a quiet residential neighborhood about 20 miles outside Seattle. FBI surveillance teams had established positions in nearby houses, and the entire block was under discreet but comprehensive monitoring. Sarah met him at the door, her face showing the strain of a sleepless night spent worrying about his safety. Emma was still asleep upstairs, according to Agent Rodriguez, who'd coordinated their relocation. "Are you hurt?" Sarah asked, examining the cuts and bruises on his hands and face. "Nothing serious," Marcus replied, pulling her into an embrace. "I'm sorry about all this, about the danger, about having to leave home, about everything. Is it over?" Marcus hesitated, not wanting to lie, but also not wanting to add to her stress. "The immediate threat is neutralized, but there might be additional security concerns we need to address." Sarah studied his face with the intuition of someone who'd been married to a warrior for 15 years. "There are others, aren't there? Other people involved in whatever happened tonight?" "Probably. The FBI is working on it. And until they find these other people, we're in protective custody." It wasn't a question, and Marcus nodded rather than try to soften the reality of their situation. "How long?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. Weeks, maybe months." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of an indefinite separation from their normal life. Then she straightened her shoulders in a gesture Marcus recognized from every other crisis they'd faced together. "Then we'll deal with it," she said simply. "Emma and I will be fine. You focus on helping them find whoever is responsible for this." Marcus felt a surge of love and admiration for his wife's strength. She understood, without needing detailed explanations, that this was bigger than a simple kidnapping case. She trusted him to handle the larger threat while she protected their daughter from the psychological impact of their suddenly disrupted lives. But as Marcus held Sarah close, his mind was already working through the tactical challenges ahead. Victor's team had possessed detailed intelligence about his personal life, professional methods, and psychological profile. Someone had provided them with information that could only have come from within his professional network. Finding that source wouldn't be just a matter of national security, it would be personal survival for his family. Marcus Thompson had spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL hunting enemies in foreign lands. Now he would have to hunt an enemy who knew him intimately and was operating in his own backyard. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and the stakes had never been higher. 3 days into protective custody, Marcus Thompson sat in the FBI's Seattle field office, staring at a wall covered with photographs, documents, and red string connecting dozens of data points. The investigation had expanded rapidly as analysts worked around the clock to map Viktor Kozlov's network and identify the other operational teams operating across the United States. Agent Chen walked into the conference room, carrying a thick folder and 2 cups of coffee. She looked as tired as Marcus felt, having worked almost continuously since the warehouse incident. "We've identified Victor's handler," she announced, setting one coffee cup in front of Marcus and opening the folder. Dmitry Volkov, former Spetsnaz officer turned private military contractor. He's been coordinating similar operations across 3 countries over the past 18 months. Marcus studied the surveillance photographs of a heavy-set man with cold eyes and multiple facial scars. Where is he now? Vancouver, as of yesterday. Canadian authorities are monitoring him, but they can't move without concrete evidence of criminal activity on their soil. And the other teams he's running? Chen spread additional photographs across the table. Houston team was rolled up 2 days ago attempting to infiltrate petrochem industries. They had detailed plans for sabotaging liquefied natural gas shipments to Europe. Denver team targeted aerospace contractors working on Ukrainian air defense systems. Atlanta focused on agricultural equipment manufacturers with Eastern European distribution contracts. Marcus counted 12 faces in the photographs. That's a significant operation. Someone invested serious resources in this campaign. Estimated operational budget of $8 to $12 million, Chen confirmed. This wasn't opportunistic crime. It was state-sponsored economic warfare with private contractor implementation to maintain plausible deniability. Any progress on identifying my intelligence source? Chen's expression darkened. That's where things get complicated. We've been analyzing everyone who had access to detailed information about your background, methods, and family situation. She produced another set of files, these ones containing background checks and financial records for Marcus's professional contacts over the past 2 years. 17 clients had comprehensive knowledge of your security protocols. 8 colleagues in the private security industry knew your family's routines and vulnerabilities. 3 government contacts had access to your complete service record and psychological evaluations. Marcus scanned the names, recognizing colleagues he'd trusted with sensitive information, clients who'd become friends, government officials who'd recruited him for consulting work. Anyone showing unusual financial activity or foreign contacts? 2 possibilities stand out, Chen said, pulling specific files from the stack. Michael Harrison, your former business partner, received a series of wire transfers totaling $340,000 from a Cayman Islands shell corporation over the past 4 months. And Drive Jennifer Walsh, the Department of Defense psychologist who conducted your post-service evaluations, made 3 trips to Eastern Europe last year that weren't part of any official government business. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he reviewed the evidence. Harrison had been his closest friend during their early years building the security consulting business. They'd shared combat experiences, family celebrations, professional victories and defeats. The idea that Michael could have sold him out was almost inconceivable. Walsh, meanwhile, had helped Marcus transition from military to civilian life 8 years ago. She'd understood his psychology better than almost anyone, had helped him process combat trauma and adapt his warrior mentality to domestic life. Her betrayal would be even more personal. What's the timeline on these suspicious activities? Harrison's payments began 4 months ago, right after Morrison Industries hired you for the Ukrainian facility security assessment. Walsh's travel dates correspond to intelligence-gathering phases that preceded each of the coordinated operations we've identified. Marcus studied the financial records more carefully. Harrison's consulting business had been struggling recently, facing competition from larger firms with better government connections. $300,000 would have seemed like a lifeline to someone watching his professional legacy collapse. But Dr. Walsh's motivations were less clear. As a government employee, she had job security and a decent salary. Why risk everything to provide intelligence to foreign operatives? Have you confronted either of them? Not yet. We want to understand the full scope of their involvement before tipping them off. Harrison might be the primary intelligence source, but Walsh could have been providing psychological profiles that helped the operations teams manipulate their targets. A knock on the conference room door interrupted their discussion. Agent Williams entered, his expression grim. "We have a problem," he announced. The Vancouver team lost surveillance on Dmitry Volkov 6 hours ago. He boarded a private jet at a small airfield outside the city. Flight plan filed for Mexico City. Chen cursed softly. Running or regrouping? Unknown, but there's more. Border security flagged 2 individuals with fake passports attempting to enter the United States through Blaine, Washington 90 minutes ago. Russian nationals traveling with documentation that matches the operational security protocols Victor's team was using. Marcus felt the familiar pre-combat tension settling into his muscles. They're sending replacements. Appears that way, Williams confirmed. Volkov's operation is continuing despite the Seattle team's failure. What about my family? Marcus asked. Still secure at the safe house, Chen assured him. We've increased surveillance and added additional agents to the protection detail. But Marcus's mind was already working through tactical scenarios. If Volkov was truly committed to continuing his operation, he would adapt his methods based on lessons learned from Victor's failure. The next attempt would be more sophisticated, more carefully planned, potentially more violent. I want to be part of the response team, Marcus said. William shook his head. You're a civilian consultant, not a federal agent. We can't authorize you for operational activities. Agent Williams, with respect, I know how these people think and operate. I've fought similar enemies in Afghanistan and Iraq. You need someone who understands their psychology and can anticipate their tactics. Chen considered this for a moment. What are you proposing? Let me review their operational patterns and help develop countermeasures. If they're targeting me specifically, use that as an advantage. Set up a controlled environment where we can draw them out and capture them on our terms. You're talking about using yourself as bait. I'm talking about taking the initiative instead of waiting for them to make the next move. They think they understand my psychology, my predictable responses to threats against my family. Let's use that assumption against them. Williams looked skeptical. And if you're wrong? If they're more sophisticated than Victor's team? Marcus met his gaze steadily. Then we find out just how much they really know about Navy SEAL training and adaptation under pressure. The next 6 hours were spent in detailed planning sessions, as FBI tactical teams, intelligence analysts, and technical specialists worked to develop a comprehensive operation designed to draw out Volkov's replacement team. Marcus's insights into military psychology and unconventional warfare proved valuable in predicting how foreign operatives would approach their targets. The plan that emerged was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would appear to resume normal activities, returning to his office and conducting business meetings while remaining under discreet surveillance. The FBI would leak carefully crafted intelligence suggesting that Morrison Industries was accelerating their Ukrainian contract timeline, creating urgency that would force the operatives to move quickly rather than spending weeks on surveillance and planning. Meanwhile, Marcus's actual location would be a FBI safe facility designed to look like his office building, complete with realistic props and civilian actors playing support staff roles. When the operatives attempted to grab him, tactical teams would be positioned to capture them alive and extract intelligence about the larger network. It's risky, Chen acknowledged as they reviewed the final operational plan. If they've learned from Victor's mistakes, they might approach this completely differently than we expect. All operations involve risk, Marcus replied. The question is whether we're managing that risk intelligently or just hoping for the best. Late that evening, Marcus was finally allowed to return to the safe house to brief Sarah on the next phase of the investigation. He found her in the kitchen, helping Emma with homework, while Agent Rodriguez watched television in the living room. Emma looked up when he entered, her face brightening with relief at seeing him safe. At 8 years old, she didn't fully understand why they were staying in a strange house with FBI agents for protection, but she sensed the tension and worry that surrounded the adults in her life. Daddy, when can we go home? She asked. Marcus knelt beside her chair and smoothed her hair. Soon, sweetheart. I'm working with some very smart people to solve a problem, and once we're finished, everything will go back to normal. Is it like the problems you used to solve in the army? Something like that, Marcus agreed. But this time, I get to come home every night and have dinner with you and Mommy. After Emma finished her homework and went upstairs to bed, Marcus explained the planned operation to Sarah. She listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful and concerned. So you're volunteering to be kidnapped by professional criminals? I'm volunteering to help catch professional criminals who are threatening other families like ours. There's a difference. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of what he was proposing. Finally, she spoke. During your SEAL career, I learned to trust your judgment about dangerous operations. I never questioned your decisions because I knew you had the training and experience to assess risks accurately. But this feels different. These people have studied you personally. They know your history, your methods, your psychological triggers. What if they're expecting you to do exactly what you're planning to do? It was a valid concern, one that had occurred to Marcus as well during the planning sessions. Volkov's operatives had demonstrated sophisticated intelligence gathering and psychological analysis capabilities. They might indeed anticipate that Marcus would try to turn the tables on them. That's why we're not going in with a simple plan, Marcus explained. We've developed multiple contingencies and backup scenarios. If they adapt their approach, we'll adapt ours. And if they decide that killing you is easier than kidnapping you? Marcus took her hand, feeling the calluses from her gardening work and the small scar on her ring finger from a kitchen accident years earlier. These hands had comforted him through nightmares about combat, had held him during difficult transitions back to civilian life, had built the home that foreign operatives now threatened. "They need me alive," he said with more confidence than he entirely felt. "Whatever they're ultimately planning requires my cooperation. Dead, I'm useless to them." "I hope you're right," Sarah said, "because Emma needs her father, and I need my husband." They held each other in the quiet kitchen of the safe house, listening to Agent Rodriguez channel surfing in the next room and the sound of Emma moving around upstairs as she prepared for bed. Everything about their situation was temporary, artificial, disconnected from their real lives, but Marcus was determined to make it end, not just for his family but for the other families who remained vulnerable to similar attacks. Viktor Kozlov had been just one node in a larger network designed to undermine American foreign policy through economic sabotage and corporate intimidation. That network needed to be destroyed completely, and Marcus Thompson was uniquely positioned to help make that happen. The operation would begin in 18 hours. By this time tomorrow, either Volkov's replacement team would be in federal custody, or Marcus would be fighting for his life against enemies who knew him better than he knew himself. As he held Sarah close and listened to their daughter moving around upstairs, Marcus realized that for the first time since leaving the Navy, he felt truly ready for combat again. Not because he enjoyed violence, but because he understood exactly what he was fighting to protect. Some battles chose you, regardless of whether you wanted to fight them. This was one of those battles. The morning of the operation dawned gray and drizzly. Typical Seattle weather that would provide natural cover for surveillance teams and tactical units positioned around the mock office building. Marcus arrived at the FBI facility at 0800 hours, dressed in his usual business attire and carrying the briefcase he normally used for client meetings. Agent Chen met him at the entrance, her expression focused and professional. "Final briefing in 5 minutes. We've had some developments overnight." The briefing room buzzed with activity as 24 federal agents, technical specialists, and tactical team members reviewed their assignments one last time. Agent Williams stood at the front, pointing to a large monitor displaying aerial photographs of the operation area. Overnight surveillance detected 3 individuals conducting reconnaissance of the building, Williams announced. They maintained distance and used professional counter-surveillance techniques, but our long-range cameras captured clear facial recognition. The monitor switched to surveillance photos of 3 people Marcus didn't recognize. 2 men and a woman, all appearing to be in their 30s with the lean, alert bearing of former military personnel. Elena Vasquez, former Cuban intelligence officer. Alexei Petrov, yes, related to Alex Petrov from Viktor's team, apparently his older brother seeking revenge. And Thomas Mitchell, interesting case. Former U.S. Army Ranger who went private contractor and dropped off the radar 18 months ago. Marcus studied the photographs carefully. They're not following Viktor's playbook. More diverse team, different skill sets, personal motivation mixed with professional objectives. Our assessment as well, Chen agreed. Which means they might not behave according to the psychological profiles we developed based on Viktor's methods. Timeline still looks good, though, Williams continued. Intercepted communications suggest they plan to move this afternoon when normal business activity will provide cover for their approach. Marcus reviewed his own role in the operation one final time. He would conduct 2 staged business meetings in the mock conference room, appear to work alone in his office during lunch, then attend a late afternoon appointment with a fake client. Multiple opportunities for the operatives to observe his routines and identify what they perceived as the optimal moment for abduction. Hidden throughout the building, FBI agents posed as office workers, security guards, and maintenance personnel. Sniper teams occupied positions in neighboring buildings with clear sight lines to every entrance. Communications specialists monitored cell phone traffic and electronic surveillance devices. Medical teams stood by in case the operation turned violent. Remember, the primary objective is live capture, Williams emphasized. We need at least one of them conscious and talking to lead us up the chain to Volkov and whoever is funding this network. At 10:30 hours, Marcus began his performance, conducting a video conference with what appeared to be Morrison Industries executives discussing security upgrades for their Eastern European facilities. In reality, the executives were FBI agents feeding carefully scripted information designed to suggest accelerated timelines and increased vulnerabilities. Through his office window, Marcus could see the building across the street where surveillance teams had detected reconnaissance activity earlier. Somewhere in that structure, professional killers were watching him, planning his abduction, believing they held every advantage. The irony wasn't lost on him. After 12 years of hunting similar enemies in foreign countries, he was now being hunted by similar enemies in his own city. But this time, he had backup, federal resources, and the element of surprise working in his favor. At 1200 hours, Marcus went to lunch alone, walking 2 blocks to a small restaurant where Agent Rodriguez posed as a waiter and 3 other agents occupied tables as customers. Nobody approached him, but he felt eyes tracking his movements from multiple directions. They were professionals, maintaining their surveillance while avoiding detection. But Marcus had spent years learning to sense when he was being watched, and his instincts were screaming warnings throughout the meal. Returning to his office at 1300 hours, Marcus continued the charade of normal business activities while monitoring communications from the tactical teams positioned around the building. The waiting was always the most difficult part of any operation. The slow buildup of tension as all parties maneuvered into position for the inevitable confrontation. At 1445 hours, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Your wife and daughter send their regards. Exit the building alone and walk toward Pine Street. You have 5 minutes to comply. Marcus's blood turned to ice as he read the message. According to the operational plan, Sarah and Emma were supposed to be secure at the safe house with a full protection detail. If the operatives had somehow gotten to them, he immediately called Agent Chen's direct number. Chen here. They claim to have my family. I need immediate confirmation of Sarah and Emma's status. Marcus heard keyboard clicking and radio chatter in the background. 20 seconds that felt like hours passed before Chen responded. Negative. Your family is secure. Agent Rodriguez confirmed visual contact 30 seconds ago. They're trying to psychological manipulation to force compliance. Marcus felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by cold anger. These people were willing to threaten his child to achieve their objectives, willing to torture him psychologically even when they didn't actually have leverage over him. What's the play? He asked. Stick to the plan. We've got you covered from every angle. But even as Marcus acknowledged the instruction, his tactical instincts were warning him that something felt wrong. The message had been too direct, too obvious. Professional operatives would typically use more subtle psychological pressure rather than such a blatant threat, unless they wanted him to know it was fake. Unless they were counting on him to verify his family's safety and continue with his planned activities, unless they had studied his psychology well enough to predict exactly how he would respond to such manipulation. At 1500 hours, Marcus left his office for the fake appointment with the fictitious client. As he walked through the building lobby, every sense was hyper-alert, cataloging faces, movements, potential threats. The FBI agents posing as civilians moved naturally through their roles. But Marcus could see the tension in their postures. The elevator arrived empty, which should have been a relief but somehow felt ominous. As the doors closed and the car began ascending to the meeting floor, Marcus realized he was alone in a confined space with no backup support. Between the 3rd and 4th floors, the elevator lurched to a stop. Emergency lighting activated, and a voice came through the speaker system. Mr. Thompson, please remain calm. There has been a technical malfunction. But the voice had a slight accent that Marcus recognized. Eastern European, similar to Victor's but not identical. The operatives weren't waiting for him to reach the meeting. They had taken control of the building's systems and trapped him exactly where they wanted him. Marcus immediately pressed the emergency call button and tried his cell phone. No signal. They were jamming communications, isolating him from his backup team. The elevator's ceiling access panel was directly above him, but reaching it would require climbing, and the confined space limited his maneuverability. Before he could attempt it, a thin stream of gas began flowing through the ventilation system. Chemical restraint. They wanted him unconscious, not dead. Marcus pulled his shirt over his nose and mouth, trying to filter the gas while looking for alternative escape routes. The elevator doors were sealed tight, but there might be manual release mechanisms if he could locate them. His vision began to blur as the sedative took effect despite his improvised filter. Fighting unconsciousness, Marcus managed to pry open the control panel and trigger the door emergency release. The doors opened 6 inches, enough to get his fingers into the gap and force them wider. But as he stumbled into the hallway, 3 figures in maintenance uniforms were waiting for him: Elena Vasquez, Alexei Petrov, and Thomas Mitchell, the team that had been hunting him all day. "Mr. Cervantes said, Thompson," Elena said in accented English. "You are coming with us now." Marcus tried to respond, but the sedative had affected his speech and coordination. He could see FBI agents rushing toward the elevator from both directions, shouting commands and drawing their weapons. But the operatives had planned for this contingency. Smoke grenades detonated throughout the hallway, filling the space with thick gray clouds that obscured vision and made accurate shooting impossible. In the chaos, Marcus felt strong hands grabbing him and dragging him toward a stairwell exit. His Navy SEAL training fought against the chemical restraint as he tried to break free from his captors. He managed to drive an elbow into Alexei's solar plexus and heard the man grunt in pain. But the sedative was winning the battle for control of his nervous system. The last thing Marcus saw before losing consciousness was Thomas Mitchell pulling a secondary syringe from his jacket and injecting additional chemicals into Marcus's neck. When Marcus awoke, he was in darkness, bound hand and foot with professional restraints that cut off circulation if he struggled against them. The surface beneath him was cold metal, and the ambient sound suggested he was in a vehicle moving at highway speed. His head felt like someone had filled it with concrete, and his mouth tasted like copper and chemicals. But he was alive, which meant the operatives still needed him conscious and cooperative for whatever they planned to do next. Through the vehicle's walls, he could hear 2 voices engaged in conversation, Elena and Thomas discussing routes and timelines and contingency plans. They were professional, efficient, completely focused on their mission. "How long until he's fully functional?" Thomas asked. 30 minutes, perhaps 45. Alexei used too much of the secondary sedative. "We need him conscious and rational for the video call." Video call. Marcus forced his mind to work through the implications despite the chemical fog still clouding his thoughts. They intended to use him to communicate with someone, possibly Volkov, possibly their ultimate employer, which meant this kidnapping was only the beginning of whatever they had planned. The vehicle began slowing, and Marcus could hear the sound of gravel under the tires. They were leaving the highway, probably approaching their destination. He had perhaps 10 minutes before they reached wherever they were taking him. 10 minutes to clear his head, assess his situation, and prepare for whatever came next. Marcus Thompson had survived ambushes in Afghanistan, torture in Iraqi prisons, impossible odds in operations classified so deep that even he couldn't discuss them with his family. He had been trained by the world's most elite military force to endure, adapt, and overcome, regardless of circumstances. But as the vehicle came to a stop and he heard his captors preparing to move him to their final destination, Marcus realized this would be the ultimate test of everything the Navy had taught him about survival. Because this time, it wasn't just about staying alive long enough for rescue to arrive. This time, he was the only thing standing between his family and enemies who would stop at nothing to achieve their objectives. The doors opened, and harsh light flooded into the vehicle. Marcus squinted against the brightness as Elena and Thomas grabbed his arms and hauled him upright. "Welcome to your new home, Mr. Browser." "Thompson," Elena said with cold satisfaction. "We have so much to discuss." But as they dragged him toward what appeared to be an abandoned industrial facility, Marcus was already working on his escape plan. They had made the same mistake Victor's team had made. They assumed that capturing him meant controlling him. They were about to learn otherwise. The building they entered was larger than the warehouse where Victor had held Jamie Morrison, with multiple levels and what appeared to be extensive basement areas, perfect for holding prisoners, but also perfect for someone with Marcus's training to find multiple escape routes and tactical advantages. In a large room filled with computers and communications equipment, a figure Marcus recognized from FBI photographs was waiting for them. Dmitry Volkov had come to personally oversee this phase of the operation. "Mr. Thompson," Volkov said in heavily accented English, "we meet at last. I apologize for the dramatic circumstances, but you have proven difficult to approach through conventional means." Marcus tested his restraints while studying the room's layout. 6 people visible, including his 3 captors. Multiple exit points. Weapons rack containing assault rifles and communications gear. Generator providing power to the facility. "What do you want?" Marcus asked, his voice still slightly slurred from the sedatives. "What I have always wanted. Access to Morrison Industries' Ukrainian facilities. Production schedules. Security protocols. Personnel information. And if I refuse?" Volkov smiled coldly and gestured toward a bank of monitors showing live video feeds. Marcus's heart stopped as he recognized the safe house where his family was supposed to be protected, but the feeds showed the house empty with clear signs of struggle visible in several rooms. "Your family was relocated 40 minutes ago," Volkov explained. "They are safe, for now. Whether they remain safe depends entirely on your cooperation over the next 24 hours. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, burning through the chemical residue in his system like acid. The FBI protection had failed. Sarah and Emma were in the hands of people who had already demonstrated their willingness to torture and murder to achieve their objectives. But even through the fury, his training held. Assess the situation, identify advantages, plan accordingly, wait for the optimal moment to strike. Because Marcus Thompson was no longer fighting just to survive or escape. Now he was fighting to save the 2 people who mattered more to him than life itself. And when a Navy SEAL fights for his family, the rules change completely. Volkov was about to learn what that meant,